Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast, and welcome back to another of our Ask Me Anything episodes, our AMA episodes. And as always, that wonderful presence in the AMA show, that is Dr. Eti Ben Simon, is back with me, making my dulcet, non-intelligible, non-meaningful answers wonderfully meaningful. Thank you for rejoining the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So let's fire away with the first question.
The first question I feel is touching on something that I see everywhere around me lately, which is AI. Someone is
Hmm.
asking what is the future of AI and machine learning in diagnosing and treating sleep disorders? Interesting question.
Yeah, it is an interesting question. What's the current sort of applications of AI and ML? As I'm going to try and pretend that, I'm an advanced sort of machine learning data scientist. I think AI and machine learning have certainly begun to impact sleep medicine, mostly by way of the accuracy and the efficiency with which we do diagnostics. And I think one significant application here is probably the automated scoring, or what we call staging, of sleep and sleep studies. We used to have to, and still do in the lab, in fact, we will record people's sleep in the laboratory, and then we will scroll through 30-second by 30-second across their entire night. And we look at all of their features with trained minds that are scientifically trained to evaluate and score sleep. And we look for all sorts of different things. It's immensely labor intensive, and there is significant human error. There have been now some groundbreaking studies, I think, starting in kind of like 2017, 2018, that introduced deep learning algorithms that were able to accurately classify individual sleep stages, so REM, non-REM, and the different stages of non-REM, light non-REM, deep non-REM, using just one EEG channel on top of the head. And it was able to match the performance of expert clinicians. I think another area that's starting to evolve, started in probably 2020, was where AI really shines, and that's in detecting certain sleep disorders, in particular sleep apnea, or these and we've done an episode on sleep apnea and what it is. Please have a listen if you are concerned about that. But certainly there, in that study, they developed a machine learning model that analyzed the heart signals that were coming from the sleeping individual themselves, combined with the EEG sleeping signals themselves. And they were able to accurately diagnose not just whether the patient had sleep apnea, but also the severity of that. And I think that that is going to markedly allow for non-invasive, cost-effective screening of obstructive sleep apnea and facilitate probably even earlier intervention of the disorder, because these machine learning algorithms are so good that you could send people a little kit that they apply to themselves at home, and then they upload the data to the cloud, and instantaneously the machine learning algorithm processes their data and tells them whether or not they do have apnea, and if they do, what ranking, what severity. And you could imagine that that machine learning result would be immediately sent off to their doctor, who could then do a telemedicine appointment and then send them out a sleep apnea device that it still has to be titrated. But I do think that there is certainly some really interesting data regarding the diagnosis of sleep apnea. I think there's probably, in the future, where we're going is probably personalized treatment plans, where we can enable the creation of personalized strategies by analyzing individual patient data or user data with wearables. And you can start to, for example, there was, I think, a study back, was it CAM with a K? I don't remember. But they were, I saw it presented at a conference and I read the paper afterwards, but they were looking at the ability of using a whole collection of different factors that they were tracking leading up to someone going on to the treatment for sleep apnea, which is called continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP for short. And they were able to determine whether or not the patient would adhere to the treatment itself using machine learning algorithms.
Mm.
And you can imagine that by predicting adherence, it really helps clinicians identify patients who may or who are going to be struggling with the treatment and allow them to sort of provide early intervention and support to increase the compliance of those patients, because they already know these are going to be patients who are going to find the journey tricky in and of itself. So you don't waste months and months of treatment only to learn that the patient actually hasn't been treating themselves at all. So therefore, it improves outcomes. I think that's another paper that was really interesting.
What were they tracking? Just natural behavior?
Yeah, they were tracking a variety of natural behaviors and also aspects of their sleep patterns. And then I think
Mm.
they looked at some of the socio-demographic characteristics. They also looked at, I think, aspects of their body weight. It was a whole
Mm.
collection of features, very, very clever. I'd never thought about that before. Not just can you use it to diagnose someone or start scoring sleep traces to prevent humans from laboriously scrolling through 8 hours of a night of sleep, but could you even predict someone's compliance to a
Mm.
treatment? And how could that scale for other types of medications too? Forget just sleep. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, or different types of insomnia treatments.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, or even there's clearly an emerging field that is looking at using machine learning algorithms. Speaking of, that can separate multiple subtypes of insomnia. We used to think of insomnia maybe as sort of three main flavors. Insomnia, I can't fall asleep. Insomnia, I fall asleep, but I can't stay asleep. Or insomnia, I fall asleep, I stay asleep, but I don't feel restored by my sleep the next day. But there's now been a number of groups that are splitting that into a broader collection, a more fine pinwheel of different variants of insomnia, all of which you could imagine would require different treatment approaches. So I think that's one area that the field is moving, is the more fine-grained separation of what we think of as a singular disorder into multiple subtypes. The other two things that I've sometimes pontificated on and written on, I think it's very clear that AI will integrate sleep data with the Internet of Things, as it's called, the IoT, and all of these devices that are sort of interconnected in our smart homes and our smart environments and that we wear smartly on our bodies. How can we create a more holistic health ecosystem? So smart homes could adjust environmental factors like light and temperature and noise based on AI analysis to optimize your sleep conditions for each individual based on their circadian rhythmicity. I think that's probably really interesting. Talking about prediction of disorders, I think it's possible that machine learning algorithms will analyze things like genetics, lifestyle factors, environmental data, and that will predict way ahead of time an individual's risk for developing a whole variety of sleep disorders. And I think there's already been one paper, it was Lane and colleagues, identifying genetic variants associated with insomnia, that a genetic screening assessment together with AI and all of these other lifestyle and environmental factors really can essentially tell you, are you going to be someone who would develop insomnia? So can you preload information to say, look, if and when this happens, here are the things, here are the resources to call and lean into, and here are the things to already do to see if you can de-risk the precipitating factors that we know instigate insomnia. The final thing, I think, well, final two things are probably AI driven therapeutic interventions. So it's very clear that at some point we're going to probably have an AI agent, as it were, who delivers cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. In other words, we're going to have digital therapists, and they are emerging fast. And I think using natural language processing, they used to be called chatbots, and I don't think we should use that term anymore, but almost real time digital therapists who can guide and adjust strategies to improve a patient's sleep. And the nice thing about those is that they are on call and present and available to you 24/7, unlike perhaps a clinician. Now, I know certainly clinicians and what they do with cognitive behavioral therapy is so nuanced and so skilled based on years and years of experience that I don't know how effective those digital cognitive behavioral therapy or therapists will be for insomnia in the next year or two. But I think it's probably coming down the pipeline.
Hmm.
The final thing, is wacky as it may sound, I think is probably brain computer interfaces. I'm not necessarily talking about Neuralink and Elon Musk and sort of all of that implantation stuff, but certainly we know that there are brain computer interfaces that we're doing for certain disease states, people who are blind, people who are deaf. And can you start to restore some of those functions by developing sort of electrode arrays in the brain that will take over that part of the brain that has become dysfunctional and give back the functions that have been lost by the damage to that part of the brain? Well, if that's the case, could we start to regulate brain activity that improves sleep? Could there be brain computer interfaces that modulate sleep? Are we going in that direction? I think we already are, not the invasive version where you implant electrodes into the brain, but there are non invasive ways that we can do this with brain stimulation. And I've done a little bit of this work and we've spun it out into a company. It's called Stim Science if people want to explore it. And there's a device there, an electrical brain stimulation device, but I'm not interested in promoting anything that I'm involved in. I don't want to become the George Foreman grill. No offense to George, but I think the future is fast coming, and I've certainly been trying to dedicate some of my time and my research efforts and entrepreneurial interest in developing devices that can actually get out to the public. And the device that we created was a transcranial direct current stimulation machine. And first gen product is out there and a second gen is emerging. But I think that's clearly a path that is going to emerge, I would say, in the next 10 years, and more likely it's probably going to be, because I say 10, the next 5. So you are very savvy, Eti. Where is technology going with sleep?
Just a quick question. What makes it AI, the device you were mentioning, is that it is learning the patterns of the individual?
So the way our device works, the device is called Somni, and the way it works is that it's a little headband that you place on your head, and it's both an input-output device. So it both inserts electrical stimulation to try to generate sleep, and you wear it before bed, by the way. You don't wear it necessarily to bed. You can if you want to, but the principal effect is we're trying to stimulate you before sleep. It's a little bit like trying to push a child on a swing where they can't swing themselves. But once you start pushing them, you give them the momentum, and then you stop pushing them. They take the headband off and they keep swinging into sleep, as it were. Or a better idea, I suppose, is that we try to fertilize the soil, electrically fertilize the soil of the prefrontal cortex, which is where you generate lots of your deep sleep. And therefore, when you take it off and you fall asleep, you germinate more powerful deep sleep brainwaves and you stay asleep more soundly across the night, has been the idea. And we've got some data that's starting to support that. I still think it's Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4 are really where the future may lie, but certainly we've had some really good success. And I think that some of the testimonials that I've heard from people, and I'm very pessimistic about this type of stuff. I'm usually thinking, no, I wouldn't release a product for at least 10 or 15 years until I've made it perfect. And thankfully, I'm not the CEO of the company. And because if you take that approach, then another 20 companies have already done it long before you and you're out of business. So yes, so it's not just an input device. We're also measuring your brain activity. So we insert some stimulation, then we listen, then we insert stimulation, then we listen. And when I say
Hmm.
listen, I mean we record your brain activity coming back. And then we start to tailor the stimulation and say, your brain is actually moving up and down at a slightly different frequency, at a slightly different wavelength pattern, you, Eti, relative to me, Matt. And so a one size fits all stimulation approach doesn't work as well. And so we tailor it, and it's called a closed loop system, where we insert stimulation and we listen and we get feedback. So it insert input and then listen output, and then we change our next input, and then we listen to the output, and then we change our next input. And so gradually over time, we learn your brain and we tailor, like a Savile Row suit, the electrical stimulation to your specific brain pattern at that moment in time. That's why it's an intelligent closed loop AI system. So yes, much as I said I wouldn't be discussing it, you asked, so there it
I
is.
asked, it's on me.
Yeah. So for, oh gosh, it must be at least a decade now, I have been an avid, probably more like rabid consumer of protein shakes. But the hard thing, honestly, in the supplement space, if you really understand and do your diligence, is this critical thing called trust. It is very hard to find a brand that you can truly trust. That's when I came across the company Puri and the really impressive founder. Even though I'm sure it makes them less profit versus other quick and loose companies, Puri takes quality more seriously than any company I've ever seen before. They have so many offerings, gosh, protein powders galore, but lots of other additions. But that's what I was focusing on here. Why did I choose them? Well, it's really for four specific reasons. Number one, they are free from hormones. Number two, they are free from GMOs. Number three, they are free of any pesticides. And number four, and this is the critical confidence part, every single batch is third-party tested for over 200 harmful contaminants, things like heavy metals, etc. All you have to do if you are a neurotic nerd like me, you can even scan the QRI code on the back of the product to get the third-party independent laboratory test results. That's how much trust and confidence they place in their product. By the way, if you want a recommendation, go for the dark chocolate flavored protein powder. It's just exceptional. In fact, it's wonderfully addictive. I didn't just say that. Anyway, it delivers 21 grams of protein per serving. And for folks of my podcast right now, you can save 20%. So go over to puri.com/Matt Walker, and that is spelled PUORI.com, Matt Walker. So again, that is PUORI.com/Matt Walker, and you will get 20% off your product.
I just want to say two things. This is not necessarily about sleep disorders, but I'm really curious about whether AI can teach us something about sleep that we didn't see before or didn't detect. So, sleep staging is based on something that has been around since we discovered REM sleep, pretty much. And is this something that AI can see, perhaps latent variables or layers or stages of processes that we don't see anymore because we're kind of looking through the glasses of sleep staging? That's one aspect that I'm really curious about with AI.
So, in other words, in the electrical static of sleep at night, there is an embedded hidden set of features that, based on the way that we human beings have been thinking about sleep, and the further we think in the same ways, the more closed off we get to thinking outside of the box, as it were. But because these machine learning and AI models can be set up to be agnostic to our biases to a degree, maybe they can go and hunt down like ML or AI truffle hounds into that wonderful ballet of physiology at night and sniff out something that we never have before. Is that the idea?
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful
Yeah.
analogy and a tasty one
Well,
too.
I'm mixing. I've got truffle hounds and I've got sort of electrical static. I don't. They
And
do.
ballet.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, God, Matthew. Okay, crashing on. Let's go on to the next
Crushing
question.
on. So, this is a question that I believe many people have asked themselves. So, I would love to hear what you think about it. Is it possible to train our brains to require less sleep, or are there safe methods to extend wakefulness without long term health consequences?
Why on
The
earth would
million.
someone ask that? Yeah, I think despite what some may hope, it just doesn't seem to be possible to truly train the brain to require less sleep without negative consequences. And if you think about it, it makes sense. We're thinking about, could I take next 20, 30 years, in fact, to gradually train myself through, maybe because my job requires it, that I become someone who is adaptable and capable of accommodating this lack of sleep? Surely that's a long, long time, and you could train yourself if you dedicated yourself to it. Well, keep in mind, it took something like evolution about 3.6 million years to evolve to put this necessity of a 7 to 9 hour sleep need in place in us, Homo sapiens. And then we think we can come along within the blink of an evolutionary eye within 20 or 30 years. And with hubris, we think that we can probably unlearn the need that has taken millions of years to take root in us. I think that that's usually a battle that you will lose, because when you fight your biology, you do typically lose. And the way you know you've lost is disease and sickness.
Mhm.
And so that elastic band of insufficient sleep is probably only going to stretch so far before it snaps in terms of the required less sleep that people are talking about. I think in the last AMA, we may have mentioned that there are some people who seem to be able to survive and even maybe maintain many of their cognitive faculties when they are getting just as little as 4, 5, 6 hours of sleep. But that's a small minority of the population. We think about 1%, and they possess a very rare genetic mutation known as the HDEC2 gene mutation that enables them to survive on that little sleep. But for most of us mere mortals, I think the evidence is very clear from even starting from the epidemiological studies across millions of individuals. I think there was a study across, I think it was about 1.1 million participants, and they found that individuals who slept for less than 7 hours, they had a significantly shorter lifespan, and it scaled with the less and less sleep that they had. By the way, it's both short and long sleep, and we've spoken about this notion of long sleep before and its relationship to mortality. But maybe I'm wrong, Eti, but I think there is the myth of the short sleeper out there. Safe methods to extend wakefulness. Look, I'm talking about the ideal world, and I know, of course, that none of us live in the ideal world. We all live in the real world. And so, what are some of the ways that you can extend wakefulness? Safe methods, I think most people know of these, which is you can strategically use caffeine if you're going to do it. And again, I would only do it under conditions where it seems to be non-negotiable, and I would only do it for a short period of time. I know some people will also use wake promoting pharmacology. Probably the most common one is a drug called Provigil. And that drug has an interest. I should do an episode on Provigil because it has a very interesting
Mhm.
history, I think, starting with the French military as a wake promoting substance to produce a 24-hour soldier. And some people have argued that there don't seem to be too much deleterious consequences to that medication, or at least harmful effects on your sleep thereafter. I think the long term use of that drug has yet to be determined. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that is a strategic, safe method to use. Overall, it's typically just caffeine. And other than that, I don't know anything else. The problem with caffeine is that it can recover some of your basic alertness and concentration deficits caused by a lack of sleep. Yes. But does it seem to salvage the more higher order complex functions of your brain, like your executive function, your planning, your decision making, your learning, your memory, your emotional stability? No, it doesn't. So I don't think caffeine is even an effective solution. It's probably plenty safe enough, but I don't think it's a very effective
It's definitely
solution.
not sustainable.
And it's not sustainable too. Yeah, and you will develop a tolerance. And then when you try to stop, you get a pretty vicious rebound effect from the caffeine. And the lack of sleep is just not a sustainable thing either. At least it's not sustainable in the sense that if you want to hold on to your life for as long as you wish, but more importantly, you want a life that is free of disease and sickness, which is what we call the health span rather than lifespan. I don't see any shortcuts around it, but maybe I'm being myopic here. And do you see any shortcuts out there or safe methods?
Mm, Not long term, but there was a study showing that if you didn't get as much sleep as you would like for one night, having a moderate exercise the next day has actually helped people feel better. Yeah.
I think
So
you're
that,
right. I think, in fact, Rhonda Patrick, I remember sending me a study, wonderful podcaster, and it was demonstrating that I think the metabolic effects of insufficient sleep, meaning the harmful impact on your insulin, your regulation of blood sugar, could actually be mitigated against by way of exercising when you are underslept. So in other words, at least for that function, but of course we don't know for other functions like your cardiovascular system or your clearance of Alzheimer's disease, sticky toxins in the brain. We don't know if exercise solved for all of those other deficits that you'll be experiencing. But certainly for that one, it did seem to be that you could almost, I'm reticent to say it, but for this very selective impairment caused by a lack of sleep, you could almost exercise your way out of a lack of sleep. How
Yeah,
that plays out long term for an individual, whether that works for the first couple of nights that you are underslept, but then after 10 years of being underslept, there's no amount of exercise that's going to exercise you out of the deficit. We don't
exactly.
know. We've got no idea.
Exactly. What's interesting about that study is that they had several types of sleep loss. So one of them was people sleeping 5 instead of 7, but the other one was just waking people up every hour for a couple of minutes, so just fragmenting their sleep. And in that case, exercise didn't help. So there's this
Mm.
really interesting dance with what kind of sleep loss you suffer from. And of course, like you mentioned, which function we're measuring. And you can't really find a win win that would cover everything. You might be able to, if there is a task that you're really good at, you might be able to do it even after you're not sleeping as usual. But then other domains would be affected, of course.
So, what's interesting from what you're saying there is that you may be able to exercise your way out of sleep quantity
Mhm.
deficits, but you can't exercise your way out of sleep quality deficits, meaning sleep fragmentation, which is a qualitative measure, rather than total amount of sleep, which is a quantitative measure.
Yeah, especially in terms of, at least from what we see so far, in terms of emotional functions, so mood and your ability to regulate emotion, anxiety.
Yeah, they seem to be rather impervious, don't they? A partner for today's episode is AG1. What is AG1? AG1 is a nutritional drink and it contains a whole constellation of antioxidants, biotics, minerals, essential vitamins. It's a long list, but you get the the comprehensive picture, let's say. I've never been interested in fads or quick fixes with diets. It just doesn't work. And that's not what AG1 is about. I've been using AG1 for the past couple of years. I have been using it. And just to note, I do buy it myself. I'm not interested in the idea of freebies for the obvious trappings. But one of the reasons that I've been using it is because I did my research on the science behind the ingredients, and I do place a high priority on scientific data as ground truth. The new formulation that AG1 has, it has over, gosh, I think it's 50 revisions and improvements. That's how dedicated they are. And you can try AG1 and get a free 1 year supply of both vitamin D and K2. And for listeners of this podcast, you can also get, in addition to those things, 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. Head on over to drinkag1.com/Matt Walker. Again, that is drinkag1.com/Matt Walker. Why don't we take the next question?
Let's take the next question. Someone is asking, what are the effects of extreme, it's kind of related, of extreme sleep deprivation on moral decision making and ethical behavior? I kind
Oh,
of like how
yeah,
it
yeah.
flows.
You
Yeah.
just dovetailed that very nicely.
I
Brilliant stuff.
know.
And actually, I should really let you answer this question. You're far more the expert on sleep and emotion and ethical behavior and pro-social behavior. But I'll offer some initial thoughts and then please jump in. But I would say that sleep deprivation is probably not merely a matter of fatigue and discomfort. It does seem to have quite a significant impact on our moral judgment capability and our ethical behavior. So I know certainly that there's a number of studies, really probably pioneered by Dr. Kilgore and his colleagues, demonstrating that a lack of sleep after one night of sleep loss, I think there was almost a 30% reduction in the empathetic concern of the sleep deprived individual, meaning their empathetic sensitivity to others. And that made them less capable of understanding and therefore responding to the needs of the emotions of other people, which you could well imagine would have significant implications both professionally, For example, you could think about healthcare or counseling service members or doctors or nurses or any number of medical staff. If you have those deficits, I think you could imagine the consequences there. And I'm sure, Eti, you may be thinking of a study that I'm thinking about that I would
Mhm.
love you to comment on afterwards. But and then I think there is not just impaired empathetic sensitivity, but impaired moral judgment. There was a study, I think, where they deprived people again of one night of sleep, and they were more likely to justify unethical behaviors such as lying or cheating compared to when those same individuals were actually well rested. So everyone acted as their own control. And they had a much more liberal, unethical threshold when that same person was underslept. And I know Chris Barnes has emphasized this point to me. He said, we often think of people as being more or less ethical, meaning that you are who you are, and whatever your ethical status is, that's who you are. But what he re impressed upon me based on this data was that it's not really true. You are a different ethical versus unethical version of yourself, dependent on how much sleep that you've been getting. And so those individuals in those studies, for example, were more likely to make decisions that prioritize personal gain over ethical considerations of others. Related, we know, and I think it was a study that I discussed with Chris Barnes on this show when I interviewed him, of increased risk of unethical behavior. And they found that sleep deprived individuals were more likely to engage in those unethical acts, such as falsifying reports or cutting corners unethically, and this seemed to be due to a decreased ability for self control. In other words, one of the reasons you are so unethical when you are underslept is because you become more impulsive. All of these things, I think, when you look at the data on societal undersleeping, it could have some significant far reaching consequences. And I think it's a really under researched area, but an area that is nevertheless probably going to impact our society, even if it's just subtle ways, 1 or 2% swings in certain ethical or moral decision making choices. Those could, if they are of significance, have manifold ripple effects. Any
Consider
thoughts
the
on
number of politicians that claim they sleep
correct? Yeah.
so
Yeah,
little.
exactly.
Those
From
two
Margaret Thatcher,
percent can
Ronald
say,
Reagan
yeah.
to someone else that I'm clearly blanking on the name of. Any thoughts or input on that? Because I know it's an area that you know well.
I think it's fascinating, and I really love this frontier of how sleep actually affects society to a greater degree than we thought before. I just want to highlight that it doesn't even have to be extreme sleep deprivation. Chris Barnes did a wonderful study showing that even just 1 hour sleep loss after the switch to daylight saving time, people usually lose an hour of sleep then. They call it Sleepy Monday. Even that alone was enough to change, for instance, how judges dole out their verdict. So they had harsher verdicts on Sleepy Monday than any other Monday of the year, suggesting that even there, still ethical behavior, but even then, there is this spectrum of changes and decisions that are swayed by lack of sleep.
So sorry, Etty, are you telling me that when I go up for sentencing, I should try to stay away from the spring time change? Is that
Yes, please, Matt,
okay?
try to
Excellent.
be
So
calculated in your
yeah,
crimes.
okay, excellent. And when I'm up for probation, make sure it's during the fall, the autumn, when we,
Exactly.
we
They're
gain
well
an extra hour of
slept.
slept, and yeah, I get a more
Maybe even after lunch. Maybe
lenient
no.
hearing. Yeah,
After a siesta, it would be best if you
yeah,
can.
siesta, and then yeah, in the fall following that time change.
And just a last thought that we were able to show together, you and I, that there are regions of the brain that are active when we think about other people that are drastically underactivated without sleep. So after just 1 night of sleep deprivation, they are reduced in activity. And I think it tells us that even our ability to think about what other people might want, let alone the motivation, just our ability, we become a little less empathic and sensitive when we don't get enough sleep.
And the reason being is because this network in the brain, a network that we sort of call the pro-social network, and particularly something we call the theory of mind network, it's a network that allows us to inhabit the mind of another. So I think one good example would be let's say, the physical pain. You see someone walking out the door and they're closing the door with their hand, and they don't remove their fingers from the door quick enough. And you can see that their fingers are going to get trapped in the door. And what do? You clench up and you almost hold your hand as if it's you that that pain is about to happen to. Why? Because you've inhabited the state of what the other person has experienced and the pain that they will experience. And so much so that you yourself are experiencing what they are experiencing. And it also translates to the emotional state, the emotional pain that they're going through. And this network of the brain, which is so important as a pro social complex species, seems to be quite considerably and reliably impaired by way of a lack of sleep. And we've replicated it several times. And I know that now a number of other groups have found this deficit in this sort of pro social network in the brain that becomes insensitive to others. So we're starting to understand the neural mechanisms, and
Yep.
that's, I think, critical too for intervention. So, all of that said, do we have another question?
Yes, we have another question, and it's going to take us into out of space. What are the unique sleep challenges and solutions for astronauts during long term space missions?
You weren't kidding. So, astronauts, actually, we did a little, well, the group that I was working with back in Boston and Cambridge at Harvard Medical School before I came out to UC Berkeley, did a little bit of work with NASA. And it's fascinating because the astronauts face a number of really specific sleep challenges during long term space missions, in part due to the microgravity environment, in part due to disrupted light dark cycles. And then, of course, just the stress of being in this tiny metal cylindrical large cigar like structure in space. I
Yeah, it
would
makes
say
me
that,
think of the David Bowie song.
yeah, I know, doesn't it? And then I start to go down some, I don't know, sinister paths of 2001 and Space Odyssey. But let me come on to maybe just two of the things: circadian rhythms and microgravity environment. Circadian rhythms are interesting. We here on planet Earth, we experience a 24-hour light dark cycle because we rotate around the sun every 24 hours, and that governs a whole collection of different biological rhythms within us that are essential. But astronauts, for example, on the International Space Station, they will experience, based on their orbit around the sun, they will experience on average something like 14 to 16 sunrises and sunsets every 24 hours. Now, you may think, oh gosh, it's lovely because I love the sunset, and now I get 16 of them every single day. That's wonderful. Well, it has a severe disruption of the circadian rhythm. And I think there was a great study by Dirk-Jan Dijk and colleagues that found that astronauts have rates of insomnia and circadian rhythm disorders up there during their missions of around 50%, 50, which is many log orders of
Wow.
magnitude higher than that we see on the terrestrial surface of this planet. The other interesting thing that really I didn't think about until I started working in this area was the microgravity effects on sleep positioning and sleep comfort. Microgravity, it causes blood flow fluids to shift upwards in an organism, leading to increased pressure in the head, which can make for uncomfortable sleep in terms of the night time, or the multiple night times, I should say. And the other thing is that astronauts often can't sleep in a bed, and not because necessarily of space constraints, but they use sleeping bags that are typically tethered to the walls because their sleep station is in a zero G environment. So they could say, well, I'm just going to lie here without a bed because I don't even need a bed. I'm just going to float and sleep floating. The problem is you will start to drift and you start to bump into things. And you could imagine that if you drift into something that is either not very useful for you and causes you harm, or probably worse still, something that you damage that is mission critical, that's probably not going to be great. Related to that are environmental factors, particularly carbon dioxide buildup. This one was sort of stunning to me. The confined environment of a spacecraft means that the exhaled carbon dioxide as you're sleeping starts to accumulate around an astronaut's head because of the microgravity environment. And therefore, the carbon dioxide does not dissipate and diffuse and disperse as it does normally here on Earth. And that could lead to this little bubble of carbon dioxide around your head, which can cause headaches and dizziness and sleep disturbances. So, on the International Space Center, they are equipped with systems like carbon dioxide removal assemblies that essentially scrub the carbon dioxide from the air in a pretty vigorous manner to maintain safety. There's also enhanced ventilation fans that are used to try to circulate the effect and prevent those CO2 pockets from forming around the astronaut's head. And then, of course, there are numerous monitors that are there to be making sure that there isn't a buildup of carbon dioxide. So it's
The
such,
things gravity
I
does for
know,
us, huh?
isn't it amazing? Isn't it? And I never would have thought of that. I don't know who would have thought of the sleeping carbon dioxide
Just
bubble
staying
danger
around, yeah.
of, yeah. So I hope that answers the question. I'm sure there are a lot more, but that's the only information that I know of. It's not an area that I know too well, even only because I've done a little bit of work in it, but not recently.
So, are there ways that they found that could mitigate? I mean, 50% of them having insomnia is huge.
Yeah, it's a real big challenge. So people are certainly schooled on cognitive behavioral therapy techniques.
Mm.
There are, of course, access to a whole bunch of professional staff down on the terrestrial planet that they can communicate with. I do believe, although I don't know how public it is, that there are certain sleep medications that are used to try to aid in maintaining sleep, which you could well understand are needed. But I don't know how lenient or non tolerating they are, because some of those medications can cause daytime drowsiness. A lot of them can, at least not with the exception maybe of the newer DORA's drugs, DORA small s. The newer sleep medications, there's kind of Gen 3 versus the Gen 2, the Ambiens. Those Gen 2 drugs often lead to daytime somnolence, and that's the last thing that you want
Yeah.
in terms of mission critical behavior. But yeah, stunning rates, aren't they? A partner of today's podcast is Shopify. Why Shopify? As someone who spends his days researching sleep and his nights researching sleep, the idea of selling merchandise was quite daunting. And you're probably thinking, what on earth is he going to be selling? We're going to start with some exciting t-shirts, all with the proceedings going directly to a new sleep education non-profit charity that I will announce later. At the moment that we started to do that, I knew what I wanted to design, but how on earth was I going to get this sleep merch into your fantastic hands? Everyone who gave me answers gave me the same answer, Shopify, and it turned out to be remarkably simple. Without any retail experience, I was able to set up and activate my store effortlessly. Shopify's point of sale system, it's really interesting. It basically just integrates perfectly with all of the different online sales components, and it just manages everything so smoothly. Honestly, it was great. Shopify POS, it handles all the complexities of sales, inventory, and it just lets me focus on my passion, which is sleep science. Try it out. You'll see what I mean about its intuitive platform. But you should also note that Shopify isn't just for online businesses. I've heard, at least from one friend in particular, it really can help revolutionize in-person sales as well. It's one system that seems to integrate everything. If you would like an offer, here is the offer. Shopify have agreed to do a $1 per month trial. It's just $1 a month if you do shopify.com/Matt Walker. So again, shopify.com/Matt Walker. You'll get Shopify for $1 a month. That's nuts. I don't know why they're doing this for me, but it's great. Okay, let's get back to the show. Anyway, should we power on to the next question?
I think it'll be the last one we have for today.
Wonderful.
And I love this question. It's a question I never thought about myself, and I should have. If you could have a superpower that only affects sleep, what would it be?
Oh,
A sleep superpower. And why would 95% of us choose to fall asleep the second we close our eyes? Actually, I would have chosen a different sleep superpower.
I think the listener's question there is interesting, that it's almost just this very unwanted situation because we are constantly on reception in the modern world. Very rarely do we do reflection. And the only time we typically do reflection is when our head hits the pillow. And that's the worst time that you want to do reflection. A Rolodex of anxiety, and people would love to try to accelerate themselves up and over that probably rather painful having to deal with your thoughts when you close your eyes experience. And maybe that's why
Hmm.
they suggest 95% of us. And there are very much nights that I experience that I would like to be one of those
Oh,
95% people. But I would say, though, I would probably choose the superpower of sleep exchanging. In other words, the ability to trade sleep and dreams to and with other people. So think about it like
like money?
I was going to say like the bank, but actually think about me PayPaling sleep and dreams both to myself at different moments in time and to other people. So, for example, I could imagine that sometime in the future, maybe I'm going to fly home in the next 2 weeks to the UK, and I know that I'm going to have jet lag and etc. Maybe I could do some sleep extension in the coming nights ahead, and then I could build up some of my PayPal sleeping and dream credit. And then I could send it to my future self to be able to withdraw when I need it. So that's one idea, which is,
That's sci-fi sleep.
isn't it? Just, I love, but then you could also do sleep gifting where you
I
could
know.
transfer sleep to other people. So, for example, if I have the ability to get plenty of sleep and I've got some friends who are new parents and they've got a newborn, I just had a blissful 9.5 hours of sleep. Well, I'm going to take at least 90 minutes of that sleep and I'm going to PayPal it over to you. And,
Including
you
your
know,
dreams?
well, I'll come on to that because I think the other thing, you could imagine is retroactively applying it, not to the future, but I could say, gosh, that time when I had 3 back-to-back NIH grants to write for funding, and even I, knowing all that I did because of the deadlines, I stupidly fell prey to not getting enough sleep. And how could I be a voice of sleep if I was neglecting it? But there you go. The real world happened relative to my ideal world. Well, could I, based on perhaps the danger and the harm that I did to my body and brain back then, could I retroactively apply sleep credit to past nights or even years of a lack of sleep and wipe the damage to brain and body clear? I don't know about that, but I think the final idea would be, this is very much like a Black Mirror episode. Could I do dream swapping? So could I trade dreams with others and maybe experience the flying dream that I've always wanted, that I've never had, that so many people have described to me? Maybe they can swap their dreams out and maybe probably not exchange the dream where people are showing up without any lower undergarments. That's the nightmare. Maybe there's like a threshold barrier where you can dream swap, but you can't nightmare
At least
swap.
that's exciting. What about the dreams where you just go to work?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can take those. Thank you very much. Off you go. The reason I think that's interesting, often we all will have the experience of waking up and either saying to a friend or our significant other in the morning, God, I had the strangest dream. This is what was happening to me. And it feels so real to me as I'm describing it. But to the other person, they're probably just hearing, oh, you had this dream where, you'd gone to give a presentation and you'd forgotten your slides. It just kind of doesn't seem very visceral or real to them, but they're kind enough to listen because they love me and they tolerate me. But imagine if you could say, no, 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 I had this dream last. In fact, hang on a second. And then you just dream swap. So you swap your dream and they just immediately undergo kind of like a concentrated distilled version, like a podcast on 3x speed. And then they kind of come back out of it and they say, oh my goodness, that was an amazing dream. Well, that was a crazy dream. Maybe it wouldn't be wonderful, but that's my idea in terms of sleep gifting, sleep debt elimination, and then dream swapping would be the abilities of my sleep exchanging superpower. Oh, Etty, just save me from this. Tell me about what
Well,
you're
if
thinking.
this was a Black Mirror episode, what about dream hacking?
Oh, you had to go there, didn't you? This is like Inception, essentially, right? What you're saying, which is that someone can come into your dreams and they can actually
Uh,
alter and implant ideas. And oh,
yeah, and also just steal your dreams and then use them to blackmail you or all sorts of things.
oh my
I
goodness,
want you to
I'm
think,
I'm
well,
going to bite my tongue before I say anything there. But
I want you to think about an actual superpower before I'm going to say my superpower, but you have to think about something that's not sci-fi.
okay,
Sleep
okay,
has enough dimensions already. First, I just want to say about the ability to fall asleep immediately. As a child, I was obsessed with trying to figure out when I fall asleep. It would keep me up. I was trying to pick the moment where I'm falling asleep. I could never do it, but I think I got a bit better at it as the years go by. But actually enjoy noticing my brain kind of falling apart. If I could choose, and I love this question because I never thought about it myself, I think I would want to have dreams that solve all of the things that I'm kind of worried about or thinking about. I want to have dreams that give me instant insight. I want to wake up and everything is solved. That's kind of the superpower I would want to have. And also, of course, just feeling very refreshed every morning. I have at least an hour of sleep inertia. The
Maybe
sleep
explain
inertia?
what sleep inertia is for folks who don't know.
It's when you wake up and you still feel groggy and disoriented, and there's just a bit of, perhaps it's not exactly sleep pressure, but just the brain kind of takes more time to get back to its usual operation. People have it the worst when they wake up. Let's say you have a flight and you wake up in the middle of the night, then you feel it very strongly. But you can also have it just after a perfectly good night of sleep. It just takes time for the system to go back online. The same way it takes time for it to go offline when you fall asleep. So I would like to get rid of that. That would be nice.
Yeah, I am someone, I don't know if it's an hour, but I probably have about 30 minutes to 40 minutes of sleep inertia. And again, it's not necessarily a sign that you are, it can be, but it's not necessarily a sign that you are having poor quality of sleep or that you're underslept. It can be, but not always. And yeah, no matter what happens, I always do have some sleep inertia. I think in truth, I would probably have the superpower that many people wish for, which is the ability to get rid of that Rolodex anxiety mind,
Mm.
what some people describe as the monkey mind. When I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm typically plenty tired when I get to bed, and I don't usually have any problem falling asleep. I would say, though, that at times when there is either emotional stress or just standard work pressure, when you wake up in the middle of the night, it's usually harder to fall back asleep. Now, fortunately, I know a bunch of different tips and tricks as to how to get your mind off itself, which is your principal job at that moment in time. But I would love to be able to have the superpower of waking up probably like I did as a child. You know, if I
Mm.
woke up, or even as a teenager, you woke up, went to the restroom, I came back, and it was so easy. It was,
You didn't even think about it.
no, you didn't. And, it wasn't even ever a discussion that you'd had the next morning to say, oh, I
Yeah.
had a rough night because I woke up in the middle of the night and I just could not get back to sleep. And now I find myself being so deeply boring and repetitive because as I get older, the more and more of that conversation around sleep is centered around, oh, yeah, I had another one of those where I woke up in the
Mm.
middle of the night and I just couldn't catch it. I couldn't get back to sleep. Now, again, I think fortunately I have a number of different tips and tricks for myself as to how to do that. I should probably do a show because I'm sure people are screaming out. But I would say using things like meditation, sleep stories, breath work, taking yourself on a mental walk, doing a body scan. All of these things are things that have a one thing in common, which is they are getting your mind off itself. Because when it's 3 a.m. in the morning and you're trying to get back to sleep, sleep is something that happens to you. You don't make sleep happen. And the harder you try, like trying to remember someone's name, the further you push it away. And when you stop trying, usually that's when the name comes back to you. And it's the same with sleep. So if you stop trying to force sleep and you try to get your mind off all of those concerns and anxieties, some of which are caused by the idiocy that is called Matt Walker, because some people have heard of all of the dangers and the harms that a lack of sleep has. And therefore they're thinking, oh my goodness, I remember watching that YouTube clip or that TikTok clip, and I'm basically going to maybe not be alive tomorrow morning if I've lost half an hour of sleep based on what he said. I am so sorry, the general public. I am so sorry. But anyway, I think even that worry is a place where you again have to get your mind off itself, and trying to force sleep is no use. And usually when you use those techniques that I mentioned, the next thing that you remember is your alarm going off in the morning. Why? Because you got your mind off itself. So I would say, nevertheless, though, if I could just have not a USB port in my head, but perhaps a little bit of an on off switch on the side of my head, that would be the on off switch for getting back to sleep in the
Yeah.
middle of the night. That would be my superpower.
Yeah, I want to kind of steal yours. I want to change my answer to having the sleep I had as a teenager, not including waking up to school, just scrub that. But yeah, it was just so easy.
Yeah,
I
as long
agree.
as you gift me the sleep of me as a teenager and not
Oh,
my
yeah.
fashion sense as a teenager, then I would take that deal. My fashion sense now, I am very much not skilled in the sartorial arts right now in midlife, but I was even worse during a teenager. And in fact, so bad that if you said, yes, you can have the on off sleep button in the middle of the night, but you have to suffer the fashion faux pas of your predilections, I would very much turn down the offer because the pain of that visual look would be too much more than the pleasure of being able to get back to sleep. And with that, I think we can close out this episode. Eti, thank you so much again for joining, and thank you, the listener, for joining us on this AMA journey. Eti, just one last time, where can people find you rather than me? Because you are going to give so many more intelligent, meaningful answers. Where can they find you on this place that we call the
I'm not sure I
digital?
would, but find me on Twitter at Atush, Etoosh, or at my email, atush@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Folks, thank you again for joining us on this AMA journey that took us to outer space and then horrific fashion choices. We will see you in the next episode, and then you will see and listen to Eti and myself in the next AMA episode. Until then, we wish you wonderful sleep and no need to find a button to put you back to sleep in the
Yes.
middle of the night. Folks,
Amen.
thank you. Take care. Bye for now.